Good evening. How are you this evening? We're going to be in John 18 tonight. And so it's kind of interesting. There's been this chapter has been an evolution for me of learning because initially when I read it, I was thinking, because it's 18 and 19 are really hard chapters. Because, spoiler alert, chapter 18 is the trials of Jesus, and chapter 19 is his crucifixion. And so you kind of like, the first time probably the first 2 or 3 times I read through 18, I'm like, well, okay. It's a trial. I mean, what's there to glean from this? And I don't mean to sound callous or I don't know what the word is, but the more I read it and the more I listened to the Lord and He walked me through it, it was just like, wow, there's lots of nuggets in here. Even to the point where I haven't done this before. I've got a page of notes here of things. I'm a high school teacher, and so one of the things when I teach my kids to write a good essay, and a historical essay anyways, you need contextualization. You need to know the context of how these events are playing out, and there's some background knowledge that you may need to know prior to going to chapter 18. And I have like a page full of notes here in front of me of things that need to be addressed before we get started. So rather than waste any time, let's get started. And I apologize, the sun is setting, but I just felt that tonight was the night I was supposed to teach John 18, and you can probably hear the jets are flying too, so I apologize if there's background noise. I'll get my apologies out early. And I'm going to tell you right now too, I have several theories in this chapter that, and I'm going to call them that as my theories, because I don't know, the Bible doesn't say, but these are my theories, and so I will announce them. And I'm going to go right with my very first theory, right from the get-go. Jesus, when he was 12, and by the way, in the comment section, I will list all the verses I reference to, and keep in mind that all 4 Gospels reference what John talks about in 18, and each one has different little things that they add in little, a detail here that's not there, or it's too shared there, but it's not in John. And so all these things, if you look down in the comments, I'll quickly reference them. The 4 Gospels address chapter 18. In Matthew, it's chapter 26 and 27. In Mark, it's chapter 14 and 15. And in Luke, it's chapter 22 and 23. And so, and I will be referencing the 4 Gospels, 3 of them anyways, as we go through this. So, in Luke talks about, in chapter 2 of Luke, he talks about Jesus when he was 12 years old. Interestingly enough, he was in Jerusalem for the Passover. His family was. And they left him behind for 3 days. And for 3 days, he was asking questions, he was listening, he was answering questions. And all who heard him were astonished. That's what Luke said. And so, and you have to keep in mind too, he's in the temple, teaching in the temple for 3 days, and all who heard him were astonished. And so I'll talk about the people who are in the temple, but he had given the Levitical priests who worked in the temple and who were charged in the temple 3 days of question and answering period. And keep in mind too, when his parents come to get him, he says, you had to know I'd be about my Father's business, okay? And so here's my first theory. Because first I'll back up. What was Jesus' Father's business? The Father's business is that Jesus was to become the Christ, the Messiah. He was coming as the Son of God, the Christ, the Messiah, to give himself up as a Passover lamb. And he was there for 3 days, right around Passover, teaching. Okay, and all who heard him were astonished. So here's my first theory. Okay, Annas, however you say his name, was the high priest at that time, and I'll explain what a high priest is here in a second. But he was the high priest when Jesus was there at 12, so he had to have heard what Jesus was teaching on, had to have heard about him. He was in the temple for 3 days, and all who heard him were astonished. And so if all who heard him were astonished, that had to have made it to the high priest. So Annas, if not personally there, had to have had knowledge of all the things that Jesus was saying back then. This is theory, but I'm also going to Caiaphas, who, when we actually get to John 18 here, Caiaphas is the high priest. And so Caiaphas had to be amongst the chief priests at this same point. And he too, probably more directly than Annas. Ananias. I'm going to call him Ananias just for the heck of it, because I don't like Annas. It sounds weird. Ananias might have, but Caiaphas, I'm pretty certain had to have. And so anyways, both of those two characters, in my theory, this is Jim Crouch's theory, had opportunities to ask Jesus questions at that time, to speak with him, and to hear his replies, to hear his answers, and no doubt were astonished, okay? And so there's as part of what the Lord kind of opened up to me in chapter 18 was there is a time for asking questions, and there is a time for judgment. And those two are separate. You have a time, we all have a time right now with the Lord where we can ask him questions, and he will answer questions. But there's coming a time when we breathe our last breath, when our heart beats its last beat, where we no longer have an opportunity to ask questions or get answers. We have to face judgment. Okay? And so I see this playing out in this chapter, this time of questioning and a time of judgment. And when there's a time of judgment, there's no more questions, there's no more answers. And so watch as that plays out here. So couple things too. Once again, Jesus on this night after Gethsemane had 6 trials and 5 stops. The first stop was Ananias. Gosh, I need to get this name. Ananias or Annas. Annas' house. He's the previous high priest. He's no longer the high priest. He's the previous high priest, but you have to understand he's the power broker. He was a high priest that was politically installed. He's not what I would call a really good high priest. And I'm going to tell you what a good high priest does here in a second. But Ananias is the very first stop. He's not even the high priest, but he's taken from the Garden of Gethsemane to Ananias' house. And you can find that in John 18. You can also find that in Luke 22. Okay? And next stop that he makes is Caiaphas. Caiaphas is the high priest. And so stop number 1 is Annas' house. Stop number 2 is Caiaphas. And there's 2 trials that take place with Caiaphas. One, he's the high priest. One is the city council, and one is the Sanhedrin. You can find the what is said on the council is in Matthew 26, and the Sanhedrin is Luke 22. And so once again, all those are in my notes. And I do better. Like right now, I'm saying Luke 22. It's actually Luke 22, verse 66. It talks about that. So if you want to look in the notes, if you want to go look up these different trials, you can. So that's 2 stops, 3 trials so far. The next stop he's going to go to is to Pontius Pilate. And then from Pontius Pilate's going to send him over to Herod's. Herod's going to send him back to Pontius Pilate. So that's 5 stops. Okay? So let's talk about high priest real quick. We're still in contextualization. We haven't got to verse 1 yet. These are some biblical qualifications about the role. First off, the high priest is supposed to be without physical defects and holy in his conduct. Okay? Without physical defects and holy in his conduct. Okay? That's pretty cool. The next thing interesting about a high priest is he's the person who offered the sin offering for the whole congregation. Okay? He's the person who went on the Day of Atonement. He went into the Holy of Holies and sprinkled blood on the mercy seat. Okay? And this was also it's the Day of Atonement because it's atonement for sin. Interesting. I thought this was a real interesting factoid I didn't know about the high priest. Okay, so they had what were they called? I got them in my notes here somewhere. Cities of refuge. Okay. You had under Levitical law, if you had certain crimes, like you accidentally killed somebody, it's like you could run to a city of refuge. Okay. And so they had these sanctuary cities, very much like we have today. Totally different context, totally different thing, but it was kind of cool biblically, Levitically. Those were set up, these cities of refuge. When the high priest died, those captives who were in the cities of refuge, who had to hide there basically from justice or from vengeance, were allowed to go free. So the death of the high priest was actually it opened up doors of freedom, and it's kind of interesting too because in Hebrews chapter 4 it talks about Jesus as our high priest, and so all of those things that I just read to you. Oh, I have one more too. He was a point of contact to know God's will, and so all of these things Jesus as our high priest does. And I thought it was interesting too. The cities of refuge, they're free when the high priest died. And I was thinking about those in Abraham's bosom. In Abraham's bosom, that was basically the holding tank prior to Jesus coming and paying the price. You know, the people are in Abraham's bosom, and when Jesus died, people from Abraham's bosom were set free. I thought it was kind of cool. And the other characters we're going to see in this story in chapter 18 are the chief priests. And you have to understand, chief priests, they're all from the tribe of Levi, and the chief priests were those Levitical priests who basically did all the maintaining of the temple. And so they took care of all the sacrifices. They took care of anything that had to do with the temple. The chief priest took care of it. The chief priest would be part of also the Sanhedrin. You'll hear the Sanhedrin. I don't know if I've talked about it in the past. I think I mentioned it earlier because that's one of the trials were held with Caiaphas' palace, was with the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin were 71 elders of Israel. It's a leftover from Moses because Moses had 70 elders plus him, 71. And so this is like the Jewish Supreme Court. It's the highest court in the land, the Sanhedrin. And so members of the chief priest would be members of the Sanhedrin as well. Okay, so that's all you need to know, and we're ready for verse 1. Verse 1. You ready for verse 1? If you have any questions at any time, please type them into the comment section and I'll get right back to you. Or private message me too. I'm good with either way. Verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. And I have to tell you, this here kind of like one of those things where you go, oh, I don't do that. But then I was talking to Sandra, and she made me feel really good, because she said, oh, you do that, and she gave me instances. But do we have, and I'm going to refer to spiritual things, do we have spiritual things that we do on a regular time where people, if they were looking for us at a certain time, like Sunday, if you're looking for Sandra and I Sunday morning, we're in church. If you're looking for me, I have a young man, a friend, I don't want to say too much because give it away, but I meet with coffee once a week, and you can, on certain days, you can meet me at a certain, anybody who knows me knows I'll be at this place with that person for coffee, for breakfast, and I have another friend I meet with on another day, and so, and another evening I meet with another friend, and so I didn't think I did. Initially I was cringed, like, ooh, I don't have like a regular place where people could find me that, speak to my walk with the Lord as far as, anyways, getting back to Jesus. Let's just leave this with Jesus because he does much better job. Jesus could be found in the Garden of Gethsemane. He had gone there before. His disciples knew it. They knew it was a great place to pray, and that's it. He went there often, okay? I think they're probably almost a little too comfortable. They went to sleep. But anyways, I apologize, I don't have my, verse 3. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Okay, so a detachment is roughly 300 to 600 troops. 300 to 600 troops. Holy macaroni. They came with lanterns, torches, and weapons. And if you read Matthew, it says that those weapons were clubs. So there's this 300 to 600 troops sent for one guy. Interesting. Notice, and I'm going to point this out here, you're going to see these 4 other times. The chief priests are there. the chief priests. These are the Levitical temple priests. They're there for 4 events. They're there at the posse, the arresting posse. They're there for a trial, okay? They're there to incite the crowd to crucify Jesus and free Barabbas. And they're there at the crucifixion. Okay, and here's theory number 2. We're up to 2 theories already. Theory number 2. I originally, when I was reading about the chief priests and I noticed that they were there for all 4 events, I said, wow, this is a real bloodthirsty, vengeful crowd. I was thinking back to, some of Jesus' comments, you brood of vipers, And that may very well be the case. That very well may have been their motivation to be there for all 4 events. But the Lord, it's kind of interesting when you have a conversation with the Lord, and you go, oh, that's kind of cool. The Lord kind of shows you stuff. And that's where I base my theories on. These theories, when I come up with this, is something I just talked to the Lord about. Okay, these 4 instances that the chief priests were there for, lump it into the category of bloodthirsty if you want to, but here's another theory that I'll toss out that I think is kind of interesting. Who was in charge of the Passover sacrifices? The chief priests. What was Jesus? The Passover sacrifice. The chief priests were there for every single event having to do with the Passover lamb that is the Christ, that is the Son of God, that is Jesus. The chief priests were there for all events. They made sure that the Passover lamb was sacrificed in accordance with prophetic law. They made sure it happened. And so I thought that's like one of those things where you just go, chief priests were there. But anyways, little note there from verse 3. Verse 4. This is another one. I got another theory here. We're up to 2 theories. We're going to have 3 here in a second. Verse 4. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come unto him, went forward, said to them, whom are you seeking? Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to him, I am. If your version says I am he, the he should be italicized. Scratch it out. It's not supposed to be there. Somebody thought it needed to be there, so they put it. That's why it's in italicized, because it's not there in the original context. He says I am. What is I am in Hebrew? It is Jehovah. No, I'm sorry, Yahweh. I'll be all right here. Yahweh. So he says Yahweh. Pretty cool. And Judas, Jesus said to them, Yahweh. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, Yahweh, they drew back and fell to the ground. I'm making total light of this. But first off, when he says, whom are ye seeking? He's setting this up. This is my theory. He's setting this up. This is a knock-knock joke. Because all knock-knock jokes start a certain way. Knock-knock, who's there? And then you go into, you wanted somebody to say who's there so you could set it up. Yes? This is a knock-knock joke. This is Jesus playing a knock-knock joke. I apologize. Oh, you see what's behind me over here? See my 2 guests? I don't know if you can see them or not. See the 2 guests? Yeah, we have a motion detector here. Let me make sure my camera is getting this here. Yeah, you see that guy there and that guy there. Okay. So anyways, if you hear the motion detector, we have a sprinkler over here. See it? It's got a motion detector on it because those bad boys over there eat my trees. I have learned a great deal about, we talked about the vine and all that stuff not too long ago. I learned a great deal about this. These guys could care less that I'm here. Anyways, they're probably enjoying the God's word. Anyways, so back to the knock-knock joke. So, Jesus, this is my theory. Jesus is setting this up so he can say his name, Yahweh. And once again, I'm a nerd, total sci-fi nerd. And I hope you are too. If not, I'm going to explain an aspect of a sci-fi movie that's one of my favorites, Dune. I love Dune. And Dune, in Dune, there's a guy who leads a rebellion. And his name that he adopts is Muad'Dib. And And so Maudip has this rebellion, and he's bringing back all these old ways. And one of the old ways is they have what's called the weirding module. And I have to watch these guys because if they go to eat my trees, I'm going to holler at them. They have these weirding modules, and so it's a box that has a speaker here, and then it emits a sonic pulse. Basically, whatever, there's certain words that are fighting words, and you say the fighting words, and it emits this sonic pulse. And one of the guys is holding his weirding module, and he says, "Hey, Maudip." He's referring to Maudip, and Maudip goes through the weirding module and actually kills something or somebody or something, and they say, "Oh, the name. There's power in that name," And so, anyways, it's a little bit of doom for you there, but Maudip is a powerful word. Yahweh is a powerful word. It's a powerful word, and so I just think that was a setup. That's my third theory so far. I don't know if I have any more theories, but that's theory number 3. I think Jesus was setting himself up so he could say the name of Yahweh. But you have to understand, powerful names runs in the family with God. Yahweh is a powerful name. Guess what Philippians 2:10 says about Jesus? At the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. So let me put my notes up here. So, up to verse 7. Verse 7. My deer appear to be behaving themselves. Then he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus says, "I have told you, Yahweh. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way." And he's referring to his apostles. That the saying may be fulfilled which he spoke of those whom you have given me, I have lost none. And that's the promise fulfilled. He talked about that back in John 17. Basically, "Father, I'm not going to lose any that you've given me." So, verse 10, then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into your sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? Okay, that verse there didn't actually kind of percolate up into my spirit until yesterday. But anyways, Malchus is the high priest's servant. Okay, he gets his ear whacked off. Okay, so this is the first recorded incident of a concealed carry sword running amok, and so, but John is the only one who actually records this servant's name, which speaks to, because you're going to see here later on this chapter, one of the apostles has inside information that allows him access into the high priest's residence, because that's where Jesus is going first. And a lot of people assume, and I do as well, that Malchus, because John knows the name of the high priest's servant, Malchus, and none of the other 3 Gospels know that name. They don't refer to it. They don't know that person's name, but he does, that John was that person who had the inside information. Okay, so Peter goes after a soft target. Okay, because he's not a. I don't think this is a servant. This isn't a warrior. This isn't one of the troops. Okay, but you have to understand, in Luke 22, Jesus healed Malchus's ear. Okay, his ear was whacked off, and Jesus comes over and heals it. Okay, and that was kind of an interesting when I was going and reading that, because it's in Luke where he heals his ear, but I was also reading in Matthew, and I came across the same instance. And this is where, going back to drinking the cup which the Father has given me. In Matthew 26:39, it records Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he says this, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And so Jesus was being served up a cup, and a cup refers to one's experience. God had laid out things for Jesus to do. That was his cup to drink. Okay? and he didn't want it to happen. Or he asked that it not, I asked that if it is possible, let this cup pass, okay? Yet what he says to Peter here in verse 11, put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? He's resolved himself to do that which the Father would have him do. And keep in mind, that's to go be the Passover lamb. That's to go to be crucified. That's to go to be humiliated and beat by the Romans, and a crown of thorns and nails in your hand, the whole 9 yards. I mean, we're going to I'm getting ahead of myself. That's chapter 19. But that's the cup he was given to drink. And where it kind of really hit me and bring it home to me, and to you possibly, is what cup has the Lord given you to drink? And how have you reacted to that? Have you complained? Have you pulled back? Have you pushed it aside? I refuse to drink the cup which you have given me. Or I'm going to drink it, but I'm going to complain the whole time. And everybody's going to know that I don't like this cup that I'm drinking. And here is Jesus. Jesus has resolved himself to the point where he's chastising Peter for standing in the way of the cup that he's supposed to drink. I thought that was interesting because I know right now I'm going through some things that I'd rather not go through, but this is the cup that the Father has laid out for me to drink, and I'm going to drink it. Verse 12. Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested him and bound him. So it's Jesus. Jesus is bound. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And so he's bound. Okay, you have to understand, when he's bound, all of the disciples flee. Matthew 26 and Mark 14 both explain how when he's caught, the disciples flee. And so they scatter. All the sheep scatter. Okay? Interesting. I'll come back to that. So he's going to Annas. He's the ex-president. He's the ex-high priest. We've talked about him already. He is actually the father-in-law of the current high priest. Annas had basically set up all his family members, corrupt guy, set up all his family members in powers of position, but he still held the real power, and he's where Jesus goes to first, okay? And it talks about Caiaphas had already made up his mind. In John 11:50, he had already made up his mind what he was going to do. And so keep in mind, remember, go back to what I said earlier, there's a time for questions and answers, and there's a time for judgment. As Jesus comes before all of these, for the most part, he is going to be silent. He's going to be silent. He'll say some things. He'll say a little bit of stuff, but he won't answer their questions. Why? And this is my theory, is because the time of questions has passed for these individuals. They're now at the time of judgment. It happens to be Jesus' judgment, but it's the time for judgment. And when there's judgments, there's not a whole lot of opportunity for those being charged to speak. So anyways, that didn't come out right, but you know what I mean. Verse 15, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and key word there, followed Jesus. I think that's an interesting term. I don't think that word was inserted there by accident. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That's my theory, is John. Is that a theory? I guess that's a theory, yeah. So does that make 4? Anyways, I'm losing track. Another disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her, who kept the door, and brought Peter in. Okay, so I'm going to use a very 2020 term. I don't know if you've heard this term. Presented. They present a certain way. Okay, and so I hear that being thrown around, and I thought it fit the equation here, so to speak, for describing Peter. Peter, I've come to believe, was a follower of Jesus, yet he presented as a lover of Jesus. And you have to understand, 2 different categories. And I would almost say there is a definitive line between a follower of Jesus and a lover of Jesus. And Peter, this is my theory, but I feel it with a heart of conviction, was clearly on the line of a follower of Jesus. He will later become a lover of Jesus. He thought he was over here. He thought his love's up here, but in reality, his love, he was alike. He was alike. We're going to find this out later. But you have to understand there's so many things about Peter that are really interesting. He is the only married apostle, which would lead you to believe the guy was more mature than the rest of the gang. Okay, he was definitely on the inner circle because he's always doing things with James, John, and Jesus. So it's Peter, James, John, and Jesus, the four of them. I mean, this is a tight circle. He's there, but he's a follower, okay? He was the guy he was the only guy bold enough to walk on water. He was the only guy brave enough to brandish a sword for the attackers. He was, and let's see, where is it at? It's in my notes here. Matthew 16. Matthew 16 through 18. It was him who the Father revealed to him who Jesus was, the Christ, the Son of God. And he said, only the Father could have revealed it to you. And on this rock I will build my church. That was Peter. That whole conversation took place with Peter. And so Peter had basically, his character was of a lover of God, but his heart was a follower of God. Okay? And so one of the things too, in verse 16, it talks, I talked about which says follow Jesus in verse 15. But look how verse 16 starts. Peter stood at the door outside. I think that's very representative of where Peter was on his commitment level with God. Matthew says Peter followed Jesus at a distance. Once again, that's characteristic of where he was as a follower outside. And that's the thing too, when Jesus told Peter that he would deny him 3 times, he knew that Peter was still standing outside the door. I'm metaphorically speaking here. And the whole conversation, if you go back and read that conversation, do I have my notes in here? Yeah, John 13, 36 through 38. The whole conversation has to do with, Jesus, I will follow you anywhere. Jesus says, where I'm going, you cannot follow. Why can't I come? I will follow you anywhere. And then he says, Peter, you will deny me 3 times. And so clearly, I think he was a follower. And he thought he was much more. But Jesus knew the shallowness of Peter's love, and he was trying to communicate that to him. And so Peter, this whole thing of binding Jesus and putting him on trial was a crisis of faith for him. I really think it was. It really pushed Peter to the limit to figure out some things. And I wrote this down here. I thought it was interesting. A crisis boils away our best facade, leaving us exposed to who and what we really are. Have you ever noticed that? When things really get tough, the real you comes out. And sometimes that frightens us. Sometimes it angers us. That we haven't changed, or sometimes we're amazed at the way what we did in those circumstances when the crisis was on, how we reacted. Did the Spirit kick in and automatically function the way it should? I have a worse story I could weave in here, but I won't. Verse 17. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, You are not also one of the men's disciples, are you? He said, I am not. Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Okay, so here's the first denial, a servant girl. She simply made the association, because John, I believe it was John, which is a theory of mine, John had said, hey, could you go let that guy in? And so she went over and she says, oh, you're probably, if John's a disciple, are you a disciple too? No, I'm not. Okay, and so, and I thought this was also interesting too. Peter is warming himself, and all I can think of too is Peter's numb. He's numb spiritually, he's numb mentally, he's numb physically. And he's standing by the fire, and he's watching, campers TV. He's just kind of like, thinking, staring at the fire, all the things you do when you're camping, right? But denial number 1, by a little servant girl. Nothing threatening here, a servant girl. Verse 19. The high priest, this is Annas, A high priest asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple. In the temple. Notice he says in the temple. I taught in the temple. Anyways, where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me that what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. Okay? And so I think this is kind of like a really lame question he asked him. Asks him about his disciples' doctrines. It's such a basic question. I mean, what are you thinking here, Mr. High Priest? You got like an opportunity with the Son of God. You're the High Priest. You're the point of contact here on earth for God. Here is God. And the basic question you ask him is, hey, what's going on with you and your homeboys? You know, I thought that was like, that's weird. But Jesus doesn't really he doesn't answer his question because, like I said, the time for questioning and answer has passed for Annas. Annas had his opportunity, I believe, the 3 days that when all who heard Jesus were astonished at his knowledge, the 3 days that he was in the temple teaching. I think Annas, that was his opportunity to ask him questions, and who knows, he may have asked some questions. But this was time for judgment. It was not time for answering questions. And Annas does not get the answers that he seeks, okay? We're going to see this is going to happen to Caiaphas. We're going to see this going to happen to Herod. We're going to see this happen to Pilate, the same exact pattern. Verse 22. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered to him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Okay, this is another theory. So I guess I'm up to theory number 5. First off, let me speak to the bound thing. Jesus was bound in Gethsemane, and he sent bound to Caiaphas. There's no indication that Jesus was ever unbound at the high priest. But getting back to this whole thing of being struck, this is just the one of many strikes that are going to happen to Jesus. There's going to be a whole bunch of strikes put on Jesus. Okay, this is the first of many. But you're going to find out with all of them, he is silent. He is not going to open his mouth to all these strikes that are put on him, except for this one. This one he addresses. And so that's one of those things where it kind of like got me to go, why did he, the servant for the high priest strikes him, and why did you strike me? I think this is kind of interesting. So bear me out. This is in theory number 5. Okay? This reminds me of something. This particular, why do you strike me? When Jesus says that, why do you strike me? This reminds me of something, and that's just like, I almost like hear an echo of this. Paul is on the road to Damascus. Bright light hits him in the eyes, and he hears a voice, and the voice is Jesus. And Jesus, what does he ask Paul? He says, Paul, why are you persecuting me? And there's this question, why are you persecuting me? Why do you strike me? There's almost like a harmony between these two questions. And this is my theory. And this is one of those things too, when you get to heaven, you're like, for me, I'm going to be running around. I'm going to be like, okay, was I right in this theory? Was I right in this theory? Because I got tons of theories here. If you've hung around me for any amount of time, heard any of my teachings, I've always got theories. And one of the theories I have is that servant later came to know the Lord. And that point right there where he turns to that servant and says, why do you strike me? That servant, and keep in mind, John had inroads to that group of people there. And there's a part of me that says John had inroads to that servant that struck Jesus, and Jesus was speaking into that servant's life. Why have you struck me? Why do you strike me? And that question is similar to, it's a harmony with the question that Jesus asked Paul And later on, look what Paul did. So my theory is, just a theory, that this servant was going through some personal conviction right then when Jesus spoke to him. Because all the other strikes that happened, he doesn't say a word. He's silent. But to this one, he does. Okay, so that's theory. We'll have to see. When we get to heaven, if I forget to ask, you ask for me, okay? But in all of this, prophecy is being fulfilled. Isaiah 53, and I'm going to read it to you. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Check out this next verse. All we like sheep have gone astray. What happened to the disciples when Jesus was bound? They all went astray. I know it's a little bit out of context, but anyways, we have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearer is silent, so he opened not his mouth. So all of this, Jesus fulfilling prophecy here. Verse 29. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you at the garden with him?" Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Okay, so here's Peter. He's still numb, still warming himself. Got two more denials under his belt. You know, he's got some people, who knows, possibly because of his Galilean accent. Are you one of those guys? No. And then here's a relative of his soft target. And you got to keep in mind, Jesus healed his, Malchus's ear. He healed it. And this is a relative of it. And the relative, I'm almost, there's another theory. Gosh, I have more theories than I know how to count. This relative, no doubt, this might have been a lead-in question of, are you one of his disciples as well? Okay, I'm just supposing. Could you tell me more about Jesus? Because I saw what he did. He healed my cousin's ear. Whatever relationship he was. Tell me more about Jesus. All three of these people who came to Peter were not angry, were not accusing, were not challenging, were not a threat. All three of them were casual. Hey, aren't you one of those guys? And all three, in Jesus, Peter's level of love, his level of commitment, couldn't measure up to being even associated with Jesus. So that's why I say he was a follower. That's why I don't think he's crossed the line. He's gonna cross the line. Trust me, he's gonna cross the line. But this whole thing, and I have to back up, and I apologize too if you can hear the helicopter noise over there. The Navy's doing some sort of operations. But this is what I love about the Lord. The Lord doesn't leave us hanging. Okay, so here's Peter. He thought he was here. Jesus says, you're here. And when he realizes he's here, because one of the things too, I skipped a point. On this third denial, if you go read, let's see, what do I have in my notes here? Okay, Matthew 26. If you go look at Matthew 26, Peter denies Christ with cursing and swearing. Okay, and so I read a commentary and I was like, what's the cursing and swearing about? And the commentator thought this was Peter's way of throwing them off on the trail. If he could curse and swear like a sailor, then they would clearly believe that he wasn't a follower of Christ. I don't buy that. I'm not saying that commentator's wrong, but I don't know. It didn't sit well with me. Here's what I think. Another theory. I should call this my chapter on theories. My theory is that Peter, when finally faced with, he thought he was up here, Jesus says, no, you're down here. When he's finally faced with this reality that he's down here, he cursed and he swore. He was so upset with himself. And I know I've been there, I don't know if you've been there, where you come to the reality of you're not who you think you were. You are not, this crisis has revealed things about you. It's boiled everything away, and you now see with who you are, and you just, you curse and you swear. And Peter cursed and he sweared. So, but back to what I was about to lead in there, which I love about the Lord on this, is the Lord won't leave us there. We'll go through these crises, even these crises when we don't hear from God. Peter's not hearing for 3 days. Peter's not going to hear from God. So we'll go through a crisis where we think God has left us. We're in this crisis. God has left us, when in reality, God's doing miracles. Jesus is off. He's getting the keys to. He's basically robbing Satan blind, and he's freeing that, and he's doing the whole resurrection thing, and so the first disciple, if you go look at 1 Corinthians 15:5, it says the first disciple who Jesus talked to was Peter. I think that's amazing, and I'm gonna save it for later. But let's see, where do I have it in my notes? I want to say it's like chapter 21. I don't have it in my notes here. Guess what? Jesus is going to do to Peter? He's going to restore him, and he's going to restore him at the love level that he's ready for. And that's what we're going to talk about. Because Jesus is going to say, because Peter's here as a follower, and Jesus is going to say, do you agape me? I don't want to get too hard for it. And he basically says, do you love me this level? Do you love me this level? Do you love me this level? Oh, I love you this level. Okay, I'll start with that. I'll deal with that. We'll talk more about that later. But I think that's cool. Jesus is going to restore Peter. He's going to meet him on the other side of the crisis, and be with him and walk with him and continue to walk with him and build his church on him. So anyways, verse 28. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium. John doesn't talk about Caiaphas. John is going to skip 2 things. He's not going to talk about Caiaphas because I told you about the 5 stops. John will not talk about Caiaphas. If you want to go read about Caiaphas, it's in Matthew 26. And John is not going to talk about Herod. And so we'll talk about where you can read about Herod later. Anyways, so then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was in the early morning. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover, which I think is interesting. But if you go read about Caiaphas in Matthew 26, it backs up my theory. Remember I told you there's a time for asking questions, there's a time for judgment. Jesus is silent for Caiaphas. He doesn't answer his questions because Caiaphas has missed his opportunity. His time for questioning was back when Jesus was 12. It's not now. Now is a time for judgment. And so Caiaphas gets the silent treatment. And so these guys won't enter because they don't want to. I read some commentaries on too. What was about being defiled in there? There were Gentiles in there. There was leaven in there, and so they don't want to be defiled. And so they basically. But it goes back to my theory. They don't want to be defiled because of the Passover, but in essence, they are with the Passover lamb. So got you there. Verse 29. Pilate then went out to them and said, What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Then Pilate said to them, You take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying what death he would die. Okay, so Pilate went out to them. So you have to understand, Pilate, he kind of reminds me, and I'm not going to I promise I won't get off on too many tangents right now, but he reminds me of a lot of politicians today where he caresses the crowd. He's afraid of the crowd. He wants to, be on the right side of the crowd. And so shame on him. Shame on the politicians who do that. But he's in the praetorium, which also interesting, hall of judgment. That's what praetorium is. Keeps going back to this whole time. There's a time for judgment. There's a time for questioning. And so he's going into the hall of judgment. Keep in mind that the Jews, it said, Pilate says, you take them and judge them. And they say, it's not a law for us to put anyone to death. The Jews had lost, because the Romans were there, the Jews had lost the right to corporal punishment. Is it corporal punishment? Capital punishment. Anyways, they couldn't take a life anymore. They couldn't do it. And so they had lost that, so that they had to go through the Romans in order to achieve what they wanted. But I looked up the 2 charges, and you can back me up if you want to. There's 2 charges that they charged Jesus with. I think this is ironic. The two things that they charge him with, claiming to be Christ, a king. Okay, that's Luke 23:2. If you want to go look it up, look it up. They're claiming, first charge number one was claiming to be Christ, a king. You have to understand, a king was a kicker for the Romans. Romans couldn't have a king. There was only one, Caesar. And any imposters had to be eliminated. So this was one of the charges that the Jews were trying to get stuck onto Jesus, that he was Christ. Christ is Messiah. He was Messiah, a king. And the Romans here, a king? Huh? We can't have that. Okay, so that's charge number one. Charge number two is in Matthew 26, verses 63 and 64. And that charge was to be the Christ, the Son of God. Okay, so once again, Messiah, the Son of God, Messiah, the King. Those are the two charges that Jesus is being charged with. These are two charges you want to say he's guilty of, but he's not really guilty. He is. But that's the charges. Those are charges he's being charged with. Kind of interesting. And that very last thing, signifying by what death he should die. Jesus said that in John 3:14, that as Moses lifted up the servant in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up. So he's talking about he's going to be crucified. He's going to be lifted up. Verse 23, then Pilate entered the praetorium again. Okay, once again, John has skipped his visit to Herod. If you want to read about that, go look in Luke 23, verses 6 through 12. And so he skips it. John skips that. And Herod, Jesus is silent before Herod, but you have to understand, Herod had John the Baptist and had a time to question John the Baptist. And John the Baptist could have answered all of Herod's spiritual questions. Okay? But Jesus is silent during Herod's questioning. Why? Because the time for questions and answers for Herod had passed. Okay? And so, on to verse 34. Jesus answered, okay, wait, I missed something here. Oh, yeah, I did. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Okay? And so remember that one charge about being the king. And so he's stuck on this. Are you the king of the Jews? Because we can't have a king of the Jews. We cannot have a rebellion here in Judea. That's my job, is to stamp out, I'm speaking as Pontius Pilate, to stamp out any rebellions, which we can't have it. Can't have it. So, are you king of the Jews? And so Jesus answers in verse 34, says, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you concerning me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? And so Jesus is kind of feeling him out right there, trying to figure out where are you going here, Pilate? You want to talk to me spiritual things, or are you just like, are we going to go through this script that you've been handed from the chief priests? But I think he does ask him. He does ask Jesus an interesting question. What have you done to get these guys all riled up? And so Jesus is going to answer him. He's going to go spiritual. You have to understand, the time has not yet passed for Pilate to ask questions. This is his appointed time and place to ask Jesus any of the questions he wants and explore any of the answers that Jesus gives. Anyways, verse 36. I'm going to check my camera here. Yeah, you can still see outside. It's getting dark, but it's not too dark. All right, let me put that back up. Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. So, still talking about kings, right? Jesus starts talking about his kingdom. This is like, you have to understand, he's talking to a politician about a kingdom. This should have been like a huge segue into, Pilate should have went, what? Okay. It's an interesting thing here. What? Tell me more about this kingdom. So Pontius doesn't bite off on this. And the thing I thought that was interesting here too. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. So I should not be delivered to the Jews. You have to understand, and you go back and read Matthew 26:53. In Matthew 26, this is when Peter has sliced off the ear of Malchus. One of the things that Jesus says to Peter, he says, "Do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels?" So at any given point, and this speaks to just the conviction, we talk about drinking the cup that was given to him by the Father. He could at any point in time, and I have to apologize, I'm old Navy, used to sit in the ejection seat. At any point in time, you could pull the handle and you get out of there. At any point in time, Jesus could just call down legions of angels and get out of this, and he's not. He's drinking the cup that the Father's given him, and he's telling Pontius Pilate about his kingdom, and it's not from here. My kingdom is not from here. This is a huge segue for Pontius Pilate. Where is your kingdom from? Tell me about your kingdom. Pilate's stuck. Pilate's stuck in a groove. You look at verse 37. Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Notice, king of the Jews. Of the Jews has been dropped. He asked that last time. He's still stuck on this charge. Are you a king then? Jesus said to him, and here's the second opportunity, second segue for Pilate to go off and ask Jesus questions. Jesus sets this up. Jesus answered, "You can say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth." What is Jesus? I am the way, the truth, and the life. That I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of truth hears my voice. What does Pilate say to him? Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Okay? This is the open door for Pilate. This is the segue to go have a conversation, and he misses it. How does he answer? He says, "What is truth?" And so the time for question and answers has just ended for Pilate. Okay? For next, I'll finish off that 38, verse 38. And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him, but you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" Then they all cried again to him, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Okay, now you have to understand, Pilate's under a lot of pressure. He's even under domestic pressure. If you go read Matthew 27:19, you'll find out that Pilate's wife was whispering into his ear, "Hey, have nothing to do with this guy, because I've had some bad dreams, and this guy's not worth it. Just whatever you can do, don't do this guy. This guy's Jesus is something else." And Barabbas enters into the picture. Now you have to understand, this is one of those things where you kind of like go, that didn't make any sense. That didn't make any sense. Okay, Barabbas, okay, it sounds here like he's a robber, okay? If you go read Matthew 27:16, it says he's a notorious prisoner. Why is he a notorious prisoner? Okay, first off, here from that verse right there you just read, he's a thief, okay? That doesn't make a notorious prisoner. But if you go read Mark 15:7, you'll find out that he was also a murderer, and he was also leading an insurrection. He was a rebel. So, what's going on here? We end the chapter with this big, huge question. Why is Rome proposing to free a rebel and crucify innocent man? It makes absolutely no sense. I mean, the whole thing, the charge of a king, but in reality, Pontius Pilate knows that this guy's innocent, and we're going to find out more out next week when we get to chapter 19. But we're on to, we finished with that, so let's talk about the questions I want you to ponder. Okay, so think about the four guys I talked about, Annas, Caiaphas, Herod, and Pilate. All had an opportunity to ask spiritual questions. Here's a question for you. Where is your heart with respect to willingness to ask Jesus spiritual questions? Where is your heart at? You are now at the point where you can ask Jesus any question you want. Is it closed? Have you closed that? Have you prematurely closed that? If it is closed, why is it closed? And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not too late. It's not too late until you breathe your last breath and your heartbeat beats its last beat, then it's too late. Ask questions of Jesus now. Ask him any question. Come boldly before the throne and ask him a question. I double dog dare you. That's my first question for you. Second question, think about that cup. We talked about that cup. All the things that Jesus had to walk through, and the Father gave him that cup. The question is there a cup that the Father has given you that is difficult for you to drink? That's question number 2. Where God has you today, is that difficult for you? Is that cup difficult to drink? The things that God has put in your life, the handicaps, the diseases, the crises, the deaths, have that been too difficult for you? The cup that God has given you, has that been too difficult for you? I would encourage you to go talk to God about that cup. Go talk to him about that crisis. And the thing too is, keep in mind too, is sometimes like with Peter, it seemed like Jesus was quiet in his crisis, but Jesus was doing something, and Jesus met him on the other side of his crisis. But I think some of us, sometimes the crisis is so much that we hold it against God, and we don't look for him on the other side of the crisis. We hold the crisis against him. So think about that in the cup that you've been asked to drink. Think about this. For this one here, really has got me really. Peter was a follower of Christ for 3 years. For 3 years, everybody thought that that Peter was in love with Jesus, based upon his actions. And so I have a question for you. Remember that line I talked about? Where are you? Where do you place yourself? Are you a follower of Christ, or are you a lover of Christ? Where are you at? Which side of the line are you at? When rubber meets the road, where are you at? Okay. And the last question I have for you, it's quite simple. Have you allowed Jesus to play I kind of was leading into this with question number 2, but have you allowed Jesus to play a part in the crisis of your life? And so that's what I'm going to leave you with tonight. And so it is rather dark here. I apologize for going into the night hours. You probably can't see it over there. The sun hasn't officially set. There's the sun right there. It's almost, I guess it probably has set. But anyways, I won't keep you any later. Next chapter, I'm going to warn you, it's going to be a tough one. Crucifixion of Jesus, and so that's going to be really, really, really tough. But hang in there. Stay tough. Anything I can pray for you or encourage you in, give me a shout. I'm here for you. Have a blessed day.